What's going on, everyone? So we are entering into week 3 of set 3 semi-competitive tournaments, and we got to dive into the top 8 that we have today for the tournament over in Sweden. There was a little bit of live commentary, which was fun. I ended up watching just a little bit, and we got to see some of the decks take place, but also we got to see all 8 deck lists here, and we're going to be showcasing them today for you all in this video. So really starting to see a meta develop, and honestly, there's been a lot of consistency across all 3 of these weeks. So I think some of these lists you could confidently say, hey, these seem to be lists that you will be seeing consistently over the next coming months. We will definitely see a little bit of a meta breakdown for the planetary qualifiers start to develop when those start to launch. So late December, early January, that type of stuff. But as of right now, the casual amateur / semi-competitive events, this is the meta that we are seeing. And it's going to be a lot of Anakins, a lot of Jangos, a lot of Hans, Sabines, and then a sprinkling of a bunch of other stuff. So we'll talk about that. Big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. Guys, love hanging out with you, chatting with you, and of course, love the support. And also, I have a TCG player link in the description down below. Be sure to use all your Star Wars Unlimited card needs. Let's talk about the first list here after running through the top 8. The one that took down the whole tournament is Sabine ECL. And this is no surprise. Honestly, the deck is basically the exact same deck, and it's still one of the top lists in the format. And that's what we expected. I don't think anyone really was putting Sabine out of their S tier list, because this has just been a consistently strong, powerful deck that can constantly outrace you and just completely dominate you in some of the games. Alongside that, we have 2 Anakin Blues in the top 8. Again, Anakin Blue has been popping up basically every single tournament, so it's really cool to see more Anakin Blues, and he's really solidifying himself as one of the top decks in the meta. We have a Han Yellow, Han 1, so OG Han. This is one of my favorite lists right now. Very, very solid list. Very much a difficult list to play, and lots of options. We've got Jango Red and Rey Red, so Tarkin Town based decks. This has been a very, very popular style for a lot of people, getting the early game advantage and outvaluing your opponent in sense of getting some damage, Tarkin Towning away, and then out-tempoing them because you have board control. And then a couple of returning ones from the old guard, Bossk Green and Krennic ECL. So Krennic Green and Bossk Green. We're going to see what changes people have started to make with these decks. I've been playing a lot of Bossk Green lately. I've gone a little bit of a different route than at least I've seen a lot of other Bossk ECLs do. This one's not an ECL, but I've been playing ECL. And we'll see if this Bossk Green is, well, similar to that. And I'll let you all know because that video is going to be coming out soon. But I'll let you know today when we go through all the lists. Starting us off with, well, actually our Anakin Blue list, or one of the Anakin Blue lists today. So this one is pretty standard, I'd say. We were seeing a lot of this type of list. Basically, the idea is you have a lot of early game plays that give you this like value engine, right? Restoring or contesting space for like Jango, or in this case, R2-D2 and C-3PO. But the thing about Anakin is that you can play R2, D2, and C-3PO because they become 3 powered attackers, which is crazy good. Crazy good, right? This is now a unit that lives your opponent's attack, or rather, when you attack in, lives that attack and still kills their unit. And if your opponent attacks this unit and then you attack their unit with R2 using Anakin's action, you maybe have avoided a little bit of damage, and you still got that trade in, and you got the value of R2's when played / on attack triggers. So lots of value in your earlier plays. And then, of course, we are curving out with very similar stuff that we're seeing with like Rey Red, Village Protectors, Yodas, K2s, that type of stuff. We got the Force Throw series, a little bit of control package, the Perilous Position. In this case, this deck's not running the Razor Crest, which I think makes sense. I actually do like Concord Dawn Interceptors a lot. So if you're going to use a space slot, then Concord Dawn Interceptors does make a decent amount of sense. And then you're outvaluing them as you get later and later into the game with your Lukes mainly, but in some cases, the Crate Dragons. Some decks are running the main deck Crate Dragons and some are not. Crate Dragon works exceptionally well against opposing Anakins. So that can be something that maybe is the modification. Not as good against like Jangos, for example. But of course, a very consistent list and something that we're seeing a lot. It's all about getting these units that were previously kind of like stall pieces or value engine pieces, but now actual threats with Anakin's action. Village Protector is a 4-powered attacker. Yoda's a 4-powered attacker. K2 is a 6-power overwhelmer. That's crazy. Kanan's a 6-powered attacker. Heck, even like Poe Dameron can be an 8-powered attacker. And it makes things like, oh, I'm going to deploy Bossk suddenly really unappealing because your K2 could just one-shot it, right? Super, super strong in that regard. The Han double yellow list has been really, really cool to see. And look at that. As I've been mentioning a lot with double yellow Han, I'm really surprised not to have seen the Enfys Nest. And, well, we are seeing Enfys Nest here in the deck. Now, this is very, 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 very similar to the list that I showed you all the other day. Not that I'm creating it or anything like that, but this is kind of what I have settled on. I do like the L3s in the deck, giving you a little bit more of like a crafty smuggler vibe. Only the 2 of R2 and then the 3 of Bodhi. I think this is mainly to deal with some of the random decks like Jango that are getting a lot of value from like Triple Dark Raid, which is one of their huge events that can do some major work. And as you go up, you got the Plo Koons and the Enfys Nest on the 7 resource slot. I am extremely impressed with Enfys Nest. Honestly, I've been so impressed with Enfys Nest. I think there is an argument to go the 3 of Enfys and 1 of Han Solo. Decks like Anakin, if they're playing Obi-Wans or anything like that, it gets bounced, which is absolutely crazy for you also getting a Saboteur 5/7 that could bounce something in the next turn. This card has just been super, super impressive to me. Depends on the deck. Depends on the matchup, right? If your opponent's going really, really deep into the ground arena, maybe the first striker Han Solo is better. But Enfys Nest also has that 7th toughness, which can be relevant, right? It actually doesn't die to Luke's, for example, which is extremely, extremely relevant. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, the Plo Koon is a really, really good addition into the deck, especially because by the time you're dropping Plo Koon, oftentimes you are having Han Solo on the battlefield, and he's a 6-powered attacker, which could be really, really nice. And then I do like the adaptation with the Millennium Falcons, the gunships, and the big Millennium Falcon, both of them, because all of these deal with a lot of the space pressure that you're seeing. This is very, very similar to what I've landed on for double yellow Han myself. And, well, I think it's a very, very good deck. Next up, we got the Bossk Green, which is a little bit of an interesting one, a little bit of a different one for sure. We've got a lot of things to talk about in this list. I'll say, first off, is there anything new from set 3? Nope, not a single card from set 3 in this list. Not a single one. The whole deck is set 2 and set 1 base. So basically no new additions, but I do think that Bossk Green is a little bit interesting. They, with this list, have gone a little bit more heavy into the 1 resource plays. I'm not that big of a fan of Dengar. It can be really good, but it also can be pretty mediocre depending on your draw and what you actually have to play. But the price at your heads, Bounty Hunter's Quarry, these bounty, like your turn 1 plays being bounties, because if you look, 3 silencers, 3 crumbs, 2 Dengars gives you 8 turn 1 plays. So it's going to be a large portion of the time where your turn 1 play is going to be something like Bounty Hunter's Quarry or Price in your head. Going with one of these to avoid like Tarkin Towning or your opponent's Tarkin Towning your units is extremely, extremely valuable. Of course, the whole idea behind the deck is you're actually just a really big ramp deck. Now, I actually didn't run resupply because I was mainly focusing more on the bounties, but they're heavily leaning into the ramp style of things. So they have the full 3 of Darth Vaders, 3 of Mauls, 2 Palpatines, 3 of Reinforcement Walkers, and 2 Crate Dragons, and a Devastator, as well as the full 3 of Ruthless Raider. So very, 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 very big on the high, more expensive stuff, right? And then to back that up, we got Force Chokes. These units, I'm less excited about Bounty Hunter's Quarry in this list because there are times where you're going to really miss. And what I mean by that is like you're going to hit a Salacious Crumb or a Dengar, and that means Bounty Hunter's Quarry is just a lot weaker. But part of the reason why you're running Bounty Hunter's Quarry, period, is because you will get games where you can use boss action to code and kill a unit. And that's really strong too. So definitely a very different direction than I went, and I really do like the clients in the sideboard. This is something that I've been doing a lot. I've been playing main deck clients, and it's really because you can pull them off of Vader's or your Bounty Hunter's Quarry, and depending on the matchup, it ends up being really, really good, right? Client already is good with Bossk, but the healing can be just absolutely devastating, especially if you can get a client down and then flip Bossk and then double claim it. Suddenly you're healing for 10, and that can be really oppressive against decks like Sabine, for example, or even a Jango Red. Next up, we got the Krennic. So another one that has come in and trying to compete against some of the newer decks. What new cards do we have with this one? Well, there's not too many. But there are definitely a few. We've got the Royal Guard Attaché, which is really sweet because it's a 2-resource 3/3 in Krennic, right? Deal 2 damage to the unit, becomes a 2/3 damage unit, which Krennic pumps up. So basically, you get yourself a Battlefield Marine in Krennic now, which is actually really, really good. Really, really good. You got yourself the 1 Calculating Magna Guard, a little bit of an earlier Sentinel. The General Grievous has come in. This one's just a 3-resource 4/4, which could be really good. We have Perilous Position in the deck, as well as Magna Guard Wing Leader. Magna Guard Wing Leader is pretty interesting. There's no like droids really in the list. Like you have the Magna Guard, I suppose, but you're not using it for the action. It's just a 3-resource 3/4. And to be honest, the Command Vigilance Villainy don't really have this statted unit. You really do want a 3/4 because 3/3s die to your opponent's 3/2s, and oftentimes they're shielded or have some other effect. You don't want to be just trading off 1-for-1 if you can avoid it. And so I think that's why they are playing the 3/4 Magna Guard Wing Leader over something else, but maybe they have a different justification for it. I've always liked Gideon's. I've always liked, the end game of Vader, Snoke, Avengers. Realistically, these are all just standard stuff that you're seeing. In terms of sideboard, nothing too crazy. Fell the Dragons for some bigger stuff and, well, some more late game and Relentlesses and Reinforcement Walkers and things like that. But overall, I think the big thing that Krennic got was more options for early game stuff. Magna Guard, suddenly a defensive unit that actually gives you some time. Royal Guard gives you a really nice turn 1 play that can basically outclass or at least trade with anything that your opponent's playing on turn 1. General Grievous outclasses pretty much anything that's playing on turn 2 in the ground arena, or at least trades. Yeah, just similar to Royal Guard. And that's what you want to be doing with Krennic, right? You just want to be doing that type of stuff, because if you're able to get Krennic down, you're able to ride him to victory, where you're getting to restore every single turn. It can be really tough for your opponent to get through that. And I think that's also another thing with Krennic, is that because he's got restore 2, if your opponent's not constantly like exhausting with Jango Red or immediately killing him with like a ECL something, then Krennic's going to get a lot of work in, and it's going to be really tough to fight through. Next up, we've got, well, another Sabine Green list here, and this one, or not another one, I say another one, but we were talking about other lists. The Sabine Green list that took out the tournament here, and well, it's a pretty standard list. There isn't really anything to talk about that's pretty new from set 3, with the exception of that Admiral Yularen. You'll notice that basically all these Sabine lists are now playing the full 3 of Admiral Yularen, and it's not always like this amazing thing. Like, you don't always want to be playing Yularen and always keeping him if you have him. But there are some games where playing a Yularen and getting that extra toughness can completely devastate your opponent's ability to interact with some of your units. And that is what Yularen provides. The extra restore is also pretty nice, but I do like this list specifically. I am really, really into playing the K2 Podameron and Wreckers as your only really expensive ground threats, and then having Podameron and Wrecker be basically your ECL targets. I do like the Bright Hope adaptation from a lot of different decks, but Sabine Green specifically because of the space prominence. And then you're still running the same Rebel synergies. We got the Rebel Assault, the For a Cause. The Darksabers, what I've been doing is like a 1 of in the main deck and then 2 of in the sideboard, because it can still be really, really good. It's just against certain decks with like No Good to Me Dead, against decks like Jango, it can be really, really brutal to go flip your Sabine. The only play you have is Darksaber. You play your Darksaber on Sabine and your opponent goes No Good to Me Dead, and you're like, take initiative and do nothing this turn and next turn. That feels really brutal. So I'm not a huge fan of Darksaber in the situations where you're fighting its more meta options, because a lot of different decks have a way to deal with Darksaber. But that's where I think it works well in the sideboard. They also have the home ones and things like that in the sideboard as well. But overall, nothing too crazy about Sabine. Pretty standard stuff that we've been seeing. Jango Red. This one's interesting because instead of running the heavy Persuader tank, this list is running the 2 of Count Dooku. Now, this is something that I also have been doing with Jango. I do like the heavy Persuader tank. I think there is definitely an option with that. And the main reason you'd want to run heavy Persuader tank over Count Dooku is because of Triple Dark Raid. So Triple Dark Raid is going to be any vehicle, so you can actually grab a heavy Persuader tank off of Triple Dark Raid, and that is extremely valuable. But in terms of just straight up exploiting something out, Count Dooku is so much better. Not only can you go ahead and have a 6/6 overwhelm, which overwhelm is pretty nice, but also if you're exploiting things like Ruthless Raiders, which is very common, suddenly you get a 4 damage trigger. And you can do this twice, right? Like if you sacrifice a Ruthless Raider and like, let's say a Crafty Smuggler or like a Greedo, you get a 4 damage trigger and a 3 damage trigger, which could knock out things like Luke, for example, big units that have that 7 toughness, or just multiple different units that your opponents have. Count Dooku has been really, really interesting to me, and I think that that is an interesting addition for sure. Also, they've been playing the Boba Fett's. Not as big of a fan of that. I think the ISB agent's a way, way better card overall, but maybe they found that Boba Fett ended up being a little bit better. And also, I actually do like the change of hearts. The change of hearts have been really, really nice. This list also decided to go for the full 3 of Force Chokes and no good to me deads. I like the no good to me deads personally, but I do like the change of hearts. And in the sideboard, we got like Crate Dragon Emperor Palpatine, which is a little bit of an interesting little late game options for some of the decks. So very, very, I don't want to say very different Jango list than we've been seeing, because it's still the same core of space units, a little bit of ground units, triple dark raid, good events, deal damage, target town your stuff away. But in terms of Jango lists that we've seen, this is one of the more different ones for sure. Next up, we've got another Anakin Blue, and we got one deck after this one. But Anakin Blue here, part 2, same list. Like, as far as I can tell, it's like the same list. There isn't really anything too crazy going on around here. I literally think it's the exact same list. Perhaps it's because I actually chose the exact same list. But we'll have to check that back in a little bit. Instead, I'm going to jump over to the Rey Red here. We got the Rey Target Town. This is very similar to the Anakin deck, right? You literally have the Anakin's Interceptors, the A-Wings, the Sabines. The only difference is Rey's a little bit more doubling down on the long-term value-oriented game plan with the getting an experience token instead of the short-term, I'm going to be able to trade with your units and get some value there. But it's basically the same deck yet again, right? Queels, Sabines, Cassians, you got your Village Protectors and Yodas, you got your curve out with K2, Poe Dameron, Obi-Wans, and Lukes, and then Crate Dragons as a top end. And this one has the Concordon Interceptors. This one's also playing the full 3 of Disabling Fang Fighters. I'd be curious to note what they're trying to hit with this, if it's just Darksaber, or maybe it's things like Perilous Position, if it's things like some sort of Entrenched. I can definitely see that. Disabling Fang Fighters, if your opponent's going to be playing Perilous Position, is an interesting option, right? I've seen many a time, and I've also played many a game where I'm putting Perilous Position on things like Obi-Wans or their Rey leader, so they can't attack that turn, or like a Luke Skywalker, or things like that. And the Disabling Fang Fighter can take care of that, so maybe that's why they're doing it, because of all the Perilous Positions in the meta right now. But of course, they're still playing that little bit of a event control, and they're playing their own Perilous Positions, so pretty standard stuff. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and open up both of the Anakin Blues here. Because this one, are they literally the same as Poe Dameron's, Kanan's? I think it's literally the same. Like, literally the same. Poe Dameron's, Kanan's. Maybe they ended up linking the same exact lists, but I don't know. Maybe I'm blind too, but they're very similar regardless, even if they're not exactly the same. I think people have started to realize, hey, if I just play Anakin with these like high toughness units that give me a little bit of value, and then I just use his action to just trade, or even in some cases, if you're fortunate enough to kill their unit and keep your unit alive, it can be extremely oppressive. And that's exactly what people are doing. So definitely the decks to be looking out for. Anakin Blue, Jango Red as per usual, Sabine Green as per usual. I think Han Yellow also. We've seen quite a few of him in the top spots. And then a sprinkling of other decks, as I said. I think Rey Red's been hovering around there. A couple of spots in the top finishes for sure. Same thing goes with, well, a lot of other decks, right? Like Palpatine's been up there. We've got, well, Cad Bane that people have talked about, Cad Bane Red, and all the other types of decks that are just solid, but we haven't seen enough tournaments realistically to see where all these other like maybe A- or A+ tier decks right under that S tier decks are going, right? Because right now it's Anakin and it's Jango, and we're seeing a lot of that, and Sabine. Like those 3 we're seeing a ton of, and they consistently do well. And then it's like Han Yellow, Rey Red, some Cad Reds and things like that. So let me know what you think about the meta, guys. Are you excited? Honestly, I am very happy. with kind of what it's shaped up to be. But I know some people are kind of getting sick of these like soft control heroism decks and like Rey Red, and they're sick of Tarkin Towns because all this type of stuff going on where you get no plays in the early game and things like that. So it's definitely not all roses for some people, but I definitely prefer this meta over so far set 2s and set 1s, even though set 1's meta was pretty good as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.